Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders and thinkers. My name's Simon Hodgkins. I'm joined today by Natalie Marlow. Natalie, you're very welcome to the podcast. Let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself. Tell us all about this fascinating world that you're involved in.
Yes, my name's Natalie Marlow and I'm a writer from the Midlands in England. I haven't been a writer for very long. Before that, I was a teacher, but I had my first novel published in January of this year. It's a crime novel, a literary noir. So it's on the darker side of crime fiction, and it concerns a private detective in 1930s Birmingham who specialises in divorce cases. And in those days, you needed evidence of adultery if you wanted to divorce, and that evidence had to be brought into a court of law, and it was largely photographic. So my detective is what Philip Marlowe, Raymond Chandler's Philip Marlowe, would have called a seedy little man who hangs around in hotel corridors, basically photographing people in their most intimate moments. He doesn't like his job. He understands it's immoral, but he's motivated very much by money. He came from a deprived background, what we would call the deprived background, so he's very much motivated by money. But when he falls in love with one of the women he's meant to be photographing, his whole world is turned upside down. He agrees to help his lover get her own divorce, and at that moment a kind of series of very noirish, nightmarish events happens to William, and what I suppose we would call the narrative arc in writing terminology is that he starts out as kind of a morally ambiguous character, not what we would call a detective, but by the end of the novel he's come to some kind of moral epiphany, and he is very much in the traditional nature of noir detective. So it's his story from a normal bloke to a detective. And there was sort of part of it is a love letter to the place I live and I was born and bred, so the Midlands. Part of it is a love letter to a genre I adore. So the traditional hard-boiled detective fiction of the 1930s, 40s and 50s. And part of it is a love letter to my grandparents and the stories that they used to tell me about what Birmingham and Coventry was like when they were younger. And that's about it really. That's Needless Alley. And I've got another novel the first draft of the second novel is just completed. It's with my editor now, and that's called The Red Hollow, and it's a second in a series. So in this book, William is very much a detective, and he's detecting a series of practical jokes played on men in a rest home for addicts, effectively. I don't want to give too much away, but it's more of a kind of manor house locked room mystery. So it's something a little bit different to Needless Alley, but with the same characters.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Natalie. I gotta ask you this: is the fact that this sort of debut novel, this critically acclaimed noir crime debut, has it taken you by surprise at how successful, how interested people are in this? Because you're already on the next installment, if you like, with some of the new characters, right? It's with your editor right now as we're recording this.
I was astonished. I am continually astonished by the critical acclaim, and that's a remarkable thing. You see me you know, pushing a trolley, wearing my leggings around the big Asda, you know, heading for the Tiger bread, and you wouldn't stop anything. You know, that I got really great write-ups in really great newspapers from very respected journalists. You wouldn't think it, and I don't think it. It's sort of it's a dream, but it's a strange sort of dream. It's like I live two lives. I'm sort of like mum Batman, you know. When I'm home, I'm like just a mum. I'm just a mum, you know. And then all of a sudden, you know, something remarkable happens. So, for example, the New Blood panel at Harrogate, it's very prestigious panel. I get interviewed by the great Val McDermott, and that's just such a remarkable thing. And I've known about it for a month or so now, but I still can't get my head around it. Cannot get my head around it. So that kind of praise is incredible, and I never expected it. Another side to that is it's like everyday people reading my book, you know, people actually wanting to buy the book. And that's remarkable, engaging with the book, engaging with the characters, because it's been in my head so long. You know, they're like my imaginary friends, these characters. And other people just enjoying it is absolutely remarkable. People engaging with it is remarkable. And it's not something I ever expected. So it's come as a very, very pleasing surprise, but a surprise nonetheless. And I suppose I'm still processing it. Yeah.
That's lovely. That's lovely. And I suppose, you know, for people maybe that haven't read the book, you're taking this very much this Hollywood noir 40s sort of backstreet story into, I suppose, the Midlands, you know, 1930s Birmingham, you know, and it's kind of got that real sort of crime element to it, and it really seems to have captured the imagination. When I discovered it, to me it was this a radio series first? Was this a podcast first? Is this on TV? Is this going to be a series? Is this a film? Because the characters are so good, and you're already writing the second one. I know it's a slightly different book, but it is great that there's sort of a continuation there, because you already have this growing fan base. And my question for you is, you at the very start when we started speaking here today, you said, well, look, I haven't been a writer that long. And obviously, you're, you know, prior to this, teaching, or whether you're doing the shopping around the local supermarket. Was that always a dream to be a writer? Where did that sudden urge to say, look, I want to get published, I want to spend, because it's not easy writing a book, particularly not a good book. You know, a lot of people have a book in them, but writing a book that really resonates, that lands well, that really catches on, takes an awful lot of effort and energy. And I'm sure you know all about that. But where did that come from? Was that a dream that you had? Was that something that you always wanted to be involved in?
You know, it was never anything I ever dreamt of, because I never thought that it was possible. So even when I was a little girl, gosh, I think a lot of writers do this. When I was a little girl, and I still do it now, it's a terrible confession, it's an embarrassing confession, but I self-soothe before I go to sleep at night by telling myself stories. And I thought everybody did it. And then I kind of confessed to friends, oh, well, I tell myself stories to get to sleep at night. And they were like, you what? What are you on about? And I thought everybody did it. And I thought, oh, okay. And so I must have always had that in me to think about story. I was an avid reader, still am an avid reader from an early age, and always adult fiction. So even though I perhaps, there were two children's novels I read over and over again, Bunny the Champion of the World and Fantastic Mr. Fox. I read them over and over and over again. Probably the most transgressive, it's Dahl's children's crime fiction. Those are crime novels. I read those over and over again as a very small child. But then I had access to adult fiction far too young. My grandparents used to pass on their library books. So with my grandfather, it was like proper pulp fiction. But with my grandmother, she'd read everything from Agatha Christie to Catherine Cookson to Jeffrey Archer, Lace, Flowers in the Attic, all of those big 1980s blockbuster novels she gave me. And I read all of those. And she was also a massive, massive fan of 40s noir. Not just the novels, so Chandler, Hammett, but also film noir. So we would sit down together Saturday afternoon when like a double bill would be on, and she was at Humphrey Bogart, great. And so we watched that, and it was absolutely in me from childhood, and it's a love that I cannot shake off. And I had my children quite young, so I'm an empty nester. And when my first daughter went to university, I kind of wanted another baby. And my husband went, "Oh, are you sure?" As in, no. And he said, go back to university. Go back to university. Do something for yourself. You know, all my 20s and my 30s were spent raising children. And he went, go back to university. So I thought, yes, I'll do an MA. And I'd like to explore I have a BA in literature, and I thought, well, perhaps I should do an MA in literature. And I got really scared of doing the theory, because an MA in literature is really theory heavy. And I thought, I haven't done that for years. I thought, I should do creative writing. And then I thought, perhaps I can't write. And that was terrifying, because I knew if I wrote something and I hated it, I knew I was talentless, because I knew that I was a reader. If I wrote it, I knew I'd be able to recognise that I couldn't do it. Does that make sense? I knew because I was such a reader, I would know instinctively if I could or couldn't do it. So I wrote something, submitted it to the UEA, so the University of East Anglia in Norwich, and I got in. And I deliberately did that MA, not necessarily to become published, but I just wanted to see how well I could explore these books I loved. Noir, hard-boiled. Even I love Golden Age detective fiction. I love Christie Sayers and so forth. How I could explore that through writing. And Needless Alley was born from that. So Needless Alley, when I say it's a love letter to the genre I love, it literally is. It's my way of saying, I love Chandler. I love Hammett. You know, that's my way of exploring those really brilliant guys. And I set it in the Midlands because I'm a Midlands girl. You know, I've never lived anywhere but. And there's a kind of gritty beauty to the Midlands. Particularly where I live in Warwickshire, you've got these massive urban industrial centres, Birmingham, Coventry. And then to the south of the county, you know, you've got Stratford and Warwick and the top of the Cotswolds. It's a real contrast between the wealth and privilege and beauty of those areas. And then you've got these massive industrial cities, sort of might of British industry back in the day. Peak by down with these places. And of course, if you think about Los Angeles, Chandler's Los Angeles, what you've got are real extremes. The beauty of the shoreline, the beauty of the beach, the immense privilege, but also the oil fields and the industry and the gangsters. So I suppose to a certain extent, I was inspired by Chandler's exploration of his city and seeing how I could explore my area using his techniques, using his real kind of love of his area, his enjoyment of taking us around Los Angeles. And that was a deliberate choice, but it also was sort of slightly subconscious as well, because I didn't realise how into it I would be until I started doing it, and I had no idea that I'd be so into the city, and I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that, Natalie. And just as you're describing it there, it makes sense from maybe some of those earlier influences to doing that MA, you know, the creative writing.
Mm.
I think you're mid PhD as we record this.
Yeah, midway.
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
taken a year off because obviously, you know, promoting Needless Alley and writing the
Mhm.
second novel, it's quite a thing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, for
So
sure.
yeah, but I'm
And
midway.
I love the Needless Alley because it makes sense. Because one minute you're sort of in this crumbling Warwickshire manor house, and then the next minute you're in, you know, the seedy canal side bar, and it's that sort of contrast, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, the
Between the
high
two. So
low.
I
Yeah,
love that, and I know you used the term about it being this sort of bohemian society, you know, these hidden spaces.
yes,
And I think
yes.
that's really nice, and it makes a lot of sense from what you've said. A question I've got for you though is, obviously, as a writer, most writers that I speak to or authors, they're also avid readers. It's obvious
Mm,
from an early age you've been reading and, you know, making stories and telling stories.
mm.
But your book is also an audio book, and I was just interested to find out a little bit about that process, how you found that. Was that purposefully thought through, or was it just something that you decided you would do later on? Because producing an audio version is more work. But some
Yes,
people love audio books. Some
yeah,
people don't like audiobooks. Some people can't fall asleep without listening to an audiobook. So
yeah.
depends on your preferences. And how do you onboard information with all the different devices and tools we have today? How does that work for you?
Well, the audiobook was actually one of those moments of joy, you know, in the process. It's actually, it was entirely in the hands of my publisher. So my contract was for hardback, audiobook, and paperback. So it was absolutely, the production was absolutely in the hands of my publisher. But I did get a say in who read. And that was so joyous. Because, you know, as a debut author, you don't have much of an idea of how your book would sound, or how it feels, rather than, you know, other than in your head. So they sent sort of several auditions, so various actors, voice actors, read extracts from Needless Alley, and we were really, really keen to get someone who could do, who was from the Midlands. You know, we didn't necessarily want somebody to be putting on the accent, because I think it's a very difficult accent to mimic. When I went to university, I went to university in the south, and everybody said to me, "Oh, you're a Brummie, aren't you?" And I went, "No, I'm not. No, I'm not." I thought, how can they think I sound like I'm from Birmingham? I'm not from Birmingham. I've got a Coventry accent. And I don't know if you can hear the difference. Um, and of course, the Birmingham accent is actually very, very different from a Wolverhampton accent. And oftentimes, the Birmingham accent is mistaken for that broad black country accent. So they were really, really keen to get it correct, get the Birmingham accent correct. And we had some really great auditions, and the guy we chose was just so perfect. And I sort of, when I was listening to them, I actually got kind of like the hair on the back of my neck stood up when I heard his voice, and I thought, oh, that's William. You know, that's William. And it was such a special moment. And And I'm a big fan of Audible or audiobooks. I have absolutely no problem, despite all my highfalutin qualifications, in saying that an audible book is an audiobook is a book. You know, it doesn't matter how you prefer to do your reading, whether it's on your daily commute while you're driving or with a nice hard back book, feet up, cup of tea. And you can do both, you know. It doesn't matter as long as you're really enjoying the story and you're enjoying your kind of quiet time, you know, away from the cares of the world, absorbed in the story. And yeah, that audiobook was such a joy to hear his voice, to hear him read my work. He's very, very good.
I love that, and it's nice that it was such a joyful part of the process.
Yeah.
I know people who read their own books, and you know they insist on reading their own books, and some people say I love to hear the author read it themselves. And then I've spoken to Vanessa Fox O'Loughlin, who writes under the name of Sam Blake. I'm sure you know her. She's a very famous crime writer too. And you know, she was talking to me about how, you know, getting the voice actor right, exactly what you're describing, can make such a difference to a story, really bring it to life, and how this is almost, it's an art in itself, being able to read it through.
Yeah.
So I really do like that. And just for our international audience, I'm just going to jump in on the accents, because we might have lost a few people here.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I forget
the
that. Sorry,
Midlands,
Simon.
no, it's perfectly fine, but I just think it's interesting because, as with lots of places around the world, there's lots of accents and dialects, and the Midlands it's quite a complex for people who aren't from the Midlands to sort of grasp, because Birmingham is sort of the one that people think, you know, and you said that, didn't you? People say, oh, you
Yeah.
must be a Brummie. And
Yeah.
actually saying somebody from Coventry or Derby or Dudley or Wolverhampton that they're a Brummie, they'd be the first, but no, I'm not. No, I'm not.
Yeah.
And then you have something called the Black Country.
Yeah.
And then so, you know, whether it's Nottingham or Wolverhampton or Telford or Stoke-on-Trent, you know, it's a large, you know, sprawl
Yes.
of lands.
Yes.
And there is differences to all the accents. And I can hear your accent, but I know for others, we may be talking a completely different language, you know, or they kind of think, what are they talking about? You know, so I just wanted to jump in with that, but it is lovely. And I think that really comes through in not just the audio book, but the written words on the page too. That sort of, you're in that moment, you're in that world. And I loved your description earlier about, you know, 1 minute you're in the sort of, you know, industrial heartland of the city, where, you know, it was tough and still is tough in lots of places.
Yeah.
And then you go half an hour in another direction, and it's the most beautiful, picturesque place, serene, that you could possibly imagine. So it is this complete coming together of cultures.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's hard maybe for people who are listening, who are outside of this side of the world, to understand that. So I just thought I'd jump in with that. But it's wonderful. And I like the audio. I've been a big Audible fan since the very early days. And I got into it because my bookshelves are creaking under the weight of my physical books. And it gets to the point where you say, how many more bookshelves can I possibly buy?
Yeah.
And there is something wonderful about it. And I'm torn, because even I today will find myself saying to people, I've read that book, and then feeling as though I still have to justify it. Well, I actually listened to it. And I try to stop myself from trying to justify it.
No, don't do that. No, you read the book. And, you know, an audiobook is the book. You know, it's beautifully produced, you know, if you're lucky, and it'll be well casted, you know, if you know, if you're lucky, but it's still the book. I have no problem with saying, oh, I read The Mirror and the Light. Well, I heard The Mirror and the Light, you know, I heard the great Hilary Mantel's book. So yeah, I've got no problem.
I think I'm an author's dream, because I'll listen to it and then I'll buy it, you know, and then I'll buy it for somebody else. So
I do that.
Yeah. We're in the same camp. Look, I want to move on. I want to ask you a few more questions before we run out of time, if I can. The other one is about people that you admire, people who've inspired you, people who've given you a helping hand along the way. Now, that might be somebody from your immediate family, might be somebody in the academic world or the writing world, or it might just be a particular character or personality traits that sort of, you lean towards. But when I ask you that question, what springs to mind for you?
Do you know, I've been thinking about this a lot. There are some great people at the university who helped me. So I don't necessarily want to name names, but they know who they are. The great people of the University of East Anglia, who without them, I simply wouldn't have done it, because I think one of the best things about doing an MA is it forces you to write. If you want to get the MA, you've got to write. and I think a lot of writers get to the point where they've written about 40,000 words and they think it's a load of old rubbish and they want to give up. And what the MA makes you do is say, actually, it's not rubbish. It may have its flaws. Don't give up. Keep writing. So in terms of practicality, that was absolutely invaluable. In terms of absolute inspiration, it's probably a bit trite. I'd like to say that my grandma was, still is, God bless her, an inspiration. And not just her, but, the women in my family. So that's my maternal grandmother. She was a great storyteller. So I spent a lot of time with her as a child, and she would tell me stories, and they would never be fairy tales. There would be great stories about when she worked in the ammunition factories during the war, stories from her childhood during the Depression. She told me a great story about, she was like one of 7, and her and her little sister went out to pick blackberries, and they had a big pan to put the blackberries in, but there were so many blackberries and they didn't want to leave them because obviously there was, money was tight. They took their knickers off, tied the legs of their knickers, and put all the blackberries in their knickers and put them home to their mum. And their mum went, just don't tell your brothers and sisters they were ever in your knickers, and I will make a big pie. So, and she used to tell these, and she was much better telling it than I did. She was a very strong woman, one of those sort of matriarchal class women who would tell it to you straight and wouldn't pull her punches. A lot of wisdom, a lot of love, but a lot of mouth. And she was the reader, such a real engagement with culture, but the culture of her youth. So a real engagement with film and jazz and the books she loved when she was in her teens and her 20s. And, you got to bear in mind, she probably left school at 14, to go work in a factory. And she died when I was in the first year of university. So when I was 18, 19. And I think it left a real hole in my life. She was only in her very early 60s. But writing Needless Alley brought out a lot of her. There was a lot of her in it. And she's an absolute inspiration, a woman of real strength and creativity who perhaps if she'd lived, perhaps if she was born in the 1970s or 80s, would have had a different life, a different career. And she is an inspiration to me still, as are all the women in my family. But I have a strong support network. So I'm probably not thanking people I should thank. But my instinct when you asked me that question was my grandma. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's lovely. And thank you for sharing that with us. I certainly appreciate it. I suppose the last couple of things I want to ask you is a little bit about what you're working on next. We've mentioned that you've got this new, I know you can't give too much away, but you've got the new exciting installment coming. But how does it work for you from a planning process now that you're in this world? Are you sort of looking at each quarter at a time? Are you thinking years ahead at a time? Or are you just taking each day as it goes? And what's on your horizon? How does it work for you at the moment?
Well, being a debut is sort of strange, really, because you haven't established your writing career. Needless Alley is critically acclaimed and people are enjoying the book. But I don't feel that I can do too much planning ahead until I really know that, you know, I can establish myself as a writer. So at the minute, I'm just trying to enjoy the process. In terms of planning, in terms of writing, all writers have weird ways of doing things, and you sort of, you often get asked right about top writing tips and things like that, and I feel a bit worried about giving my top writing tips because I think writers are as individual as individuals. So but for me, I have to have my head in that story, and it has to be a constant process. So when I'm writing, I am writing. When I'm not writing, I whiz around my house doing rubbish little jobs, painting bathrooms, painting utilities, getting the garden sorted, because I know as soon as I have to start writing again, it's just me and the laptop and my head in the laptop, because I have to maintain like a certain amount of hours at the desk to keep in that story. It's like exercising a muscle. And I don't, and I, if I wish I could say, oh, I like to do 1,000 words a day. No, I do as much as I possibly can. And that might be 300 words, because it might be that I delete 1,500, write 400, delete 100, until I get it as perfect as possible. And some writers would be like, what is she like? You know, so there's this a writing technique called, I'm going to say crap, but they don't say crap. The crap first draft. Yeah, don't do that. I get my chapter exactly how I want it, and then I move on. And oh, it's painful. And it does mean in the editing process, a chapter I may have spent a month perfecting may have to go. So when I kill my darlings, I really do kill them. I slaughter them mercilessly. Because even though it took me ages to write, I have to do that process where I'm so in the story, it has to be perfect for me before I move on. And that's not planning at all. That's just kind of craziness, I think.
But I love you sharing that, because you're right. All the writers and authors I speak with have a very different approach. They write at different times of the day. Some work to a set amount of words. Some people have to write every day, otherwise they don't feel normal, you know. Some people, like you're saying, you've got to do certain things, because once I get into this zone, I'm going to be immersed in this world for a period of time. But because your approach is very much really working hard, you're not just putting the draft down of the chapter, you're really crafting a chapter at a time.
Yeah.
Sometimes 300 words a day crafting.
Yeah.
How does it work then when it gets handed over for editing and all, all the sort of revisions come back? Because that must be even tougher.
Yes, it is tough. It is tough. But I have a pragmatic nature. I'm a very pragmatic person, I think. So what I know is that even though I've spent all of that time on that chapter, all of that time on that character, if somebody I know and trust, if a professional tells me it's not working, then I trust that professional. Because what I want at the very end of the process is for my book to be the very best I can produce at that time. It'll never be as perfect as I want it, because I'm a horrible perfectionist. But what I do know is that editing process is crucial to getting it as good as it can possibly be for my reader. So although sometimes criticism is kind of hard to take, and I'm not going to deny that, I'm not going to say, oh, it's just like water off a duck's back, because it's not. I think any creative has to be able to take it and say, yeah, you might be right. Let me sit with that for a while and make a decision about it. And if you sit with it for a while and you see that it's right, then you change it. But if in your deep down gut, you know that actually with that tweak it could work, go back and say, I think with that tweak it could work. But don't ever think if you're going through this process, or if you're sort of like me a couple of years ago, when your first novel's being edited, don't ever think that process or those criticisms are criticism. What they're there to do is to make it the dialogue between you and your editor to make that work better. And that's what I want. I want my work to be better. I want it to be as good as it can possibly be.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. And look, for people that want to write that book or are interested in this this world, have you got any advice for people? Maybe advice that has been passed on to you along the way, or maybe things that you wish you would have known then, what you know now?
Yeah. The best advice I can give is to write what you want to write. Don't look at the sort of the books that are massive debuts at the minute and think, oh, I'm going to write another one of those. Because what you have to do is write what you love, what's in your heart. That sounds a bit corny. It has to be you. It has to be your story. So absolutely write that. And then craft that story to the best of your ability. And don't necessarily look too much at trends. And of course, I suppose my point of view is, I write essentially literary noir. So, but somebody who writes very specifically for a bestseller market might give you different advice. But if you want to write similar stuff to me, which is perhaps more on the literary side of genre fiction, then you've got to write what's in your heart. You've got to write your story. And then you just have to hope for the best. And you've got to be determined, dogged, really stubborn, dogged. Get it finished. You get to 40k and you think it's rubbish. No, it's not. Finish your book. You finish your book and you think it's rubbish. No, it's not. Edit your book. And you have to go through these processes where you think, oh, I don't want to do it anymore. But you do it and you do it and you see that process through. I say to my husband, this whole writing malarkey is like 20% talent and 80% stubbornness. Honestly.
That's a great
you've got to be
quote, Natalie.
stubborn.
That's a great quote. Well, thank you so much for sharing that advice. And look, before we wrap up, I just have one more thing to ask you, and that is, if people want to find out more about you, find out more about Needless Alley, buy the book, listen to the audio, where are you sending people to these days who want to connect?
Well, I'm kind of happy to chat with people on Twitter, so that's Natalie Marlow too, I think. If you just pop Natalie Marlow in Twitter, you'll see my curly hair. I'm on Instagram as Natalie Loves Noir for obvious reasons. But I don't have a specific website. Needless Alley is available in all good bookshops, as they say. I do. I am quite a happy tweeter. I tend to tweet a lot about film and books and music and things, and my cat mostly. But if you want to interact on Twitter, come and say hello.
That's wonderful. And all the big online book resellers carry this title. It's available on Audible as well, as we mentioned, as an audio version if people want to get that. But look, that brings us lovely to the end of this episode today with Natalie. So thank you to everybody who's been watching or listening to us around the world. Make sure that you follow, like, subscribe, do everything I need you to do to help support this podcast. And hopefully you'll join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and with leaders and thinkers. But thank you, Natalie. It's been wonderful to catch up with you. Congratulations on all your success and continued success, my friend.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been lovely to chat.